You are listening to part 3 of the Daily Wisdom Pills series, 9 Rules for a Monumental Life.
Third rule for a monumental life is simply remember this. It's very important. Originality is the DNA of legendary. Another thing I'm noticing in the world right now, the 95%, the majority, and you know my brain tattoo, if you want the results only 5% of the population has, you've got to be willing to do what 95% of the population are not willing to do. And so most people are caught up in the cult of superficiality and immediate gratification. What they want to do is build a business that is legendary in 6 weeks. What they want to do is be super fit at Federer level within a quarter. What they want to do is build a love relationship that is remarkable in the next 6 months. Well, here's what I've learned. And I've been teaching personal mastery and leadership and working with billionaires and titans and Nike, FedEx, Starbucks, IBM, Oracle, NASA, Young Presidents Organization for going into my 3rd decade. So this isn't from a book I've read. This is from boots on the ground with organizations and A players across the planet. Legendary takes time. And you can find yourself a gargantuan competitive advantage where you say, I'm going to think long term. I'm going to play the long game. I understand that genius and world class and legendary is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And when you do that, you start to raise your level of awareness. And you see your job as a craft, not just a job. And you start to say, I'm not going to put anything out into the world that is less than Steve Jobs' level. You know, Steve Jobs really wasn't an entrepreneur. He really didn't care much about the money. Steve Jobs really was an artist. And you've probably heard me share this before, but there's the great story about when in the mid-1980s, Steve Jobs said, we're going to launch the first Apple Macintosh. And he said, you know, I want this computer to be revolutionary. And when I interviewed Steve Wozniak, the co-founder and Steve Jobs' partner at a Titan Summit in Zurich a little while ago, I heard this firsthand, that Steve Wozniak wanted to create computers that were just industry that would shake up the status quo. That was his obsession. He wanted to do things no other coder could do. And he told me Steve Jobs was an artist. And so in the mid-1980s, Steve Jobs got his design team around him. And here's what he told them. This is the deliverable, guys. I want this first Apple Macintosh to be so beautiful, it brings tears to people's eyes. But the real deliverable is, I want the inside to be art. And the design team said, well, Steve, no one's going to look inside the computer. No one's going to open it up. Why don't we just focus on a world-class user experience on the outside and beautiful architecture and design? And he said, no, this is what I want. And so when his design team went to work and the engineering team went to work, they literally said, we've got to deliver on Steve's obsession. And when Steve Jobs first saw that Apple Macintosh, when it was produced, he started to cry because he saw the beauty of execution around his vision. And then when he saw the inside, he was moved deeply because Steve Jobs wasn't an entrepreneur. He was much more an artist. And they looked at his design team and he said, now I want you to sign the circuit board. And they said, why? And he said, because all artists sign their work. I don't know what you do. I don't know where you live. One thing I know for sure, maybe the world has not told you you are an artist, but I encourage you, see your work and anything you produce as poetry. And your good name is on what you're releasing to the world. And rather than putting out a lot of poetry and a lot of work, why not put out less work, but work that is legendary? And so the point I'm really trying to make on rule number 3 of creating a monumental life is originality is the DNA of legendary. Stop doing what everyone else is doing. Jean Basquiat, Miles Davis, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Stephen King, whoever it is, the people who make their mark on the world through their craft have one thing in common. They go blue ocean. They're not followers. They're leaders. They're not copiers. They're creators. I'm going to repeat that again because I see it so often. People see someone whose work they like, whose brand they like, whose books they like, and they start copying. That's coming from scarcity. That's coming from from a lack of authenticity. And I understand it takes time, but this is why I always say leadership begins within. When you start to know who you are, when you start to trust your instinct, when you start to work on your craft, when you put in the time to study the masters versus steal from the masters, here's what starts to happen. Through your daily practice over many decades, you start to find a rhythm and you start to develop a voice. And then you become like Miles Davis. I was in Mauritius working on my new book, and every night after I'd finished writing for 3 hours, I'd eat great fish called capitaine, and I'd drink sparkling water with a little bit of lemon, and I'd watch the stars over the big African sky, and I'd listen to Miles Davis's autobiography. And here's what I've learned. He would play with the cool cats. In New York, all Dizzy Gillespie would come out to hear Miles Davis. But over time, through his influences and his relentless practice and seeing his work as a craft, he started playing in a way no one else had ever heard. Because he stopped copying and he started creating. And he earned the ability to find his own voice. And it's not until you have put in the time, find the right influences, and stop copying and have the bravery to leave the 95% and forget about your peers and what they're doing. Forget about competition. Think about creation. And remember that originality is the DNA of legendary. And if you get this one rule right, you will own the game and you'll never be bailing it in. You'll always be bringing it on.